Today on Artifactually Speaking, I'm looking at the first locks in history. I'm Brad Hafford, archaeologist from the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm here on location once again at the ancient city of Lagash. I'm actually in the palm grove out behind our dig house. The site itself is about 1.5 kilometers away. But today's artifact, I've called it a lock. Why? It's really just clay that's been stamped with some kind of imagery. But that imagery stood for an authority, most likely. Professor Pittman is particularly interested in these things and has studied them for most of her career.
And in the early period, their primary function is to mark clay masses that were used to secure either the mouths of jars or fabric tied around jars or doors alternatively. And we can determine the function of the mud mass by its particular shape.
It could have indicated what was inside something. It was placed on a jar or perhaps on a door in order to seal that. The door would be shut, tied shut, and then the clay was placed on it, and then a sealing was impressed.
Yes, these serve to secure the closing of the door. And so only by disturbing the ceilings would you be able to open the door. And so it isn't a lock the way that we have locks where you just can't get in, but it is a lock in that if you take it off, you can't put it back on again.
We're finding many of these clay ceilings in our trenches at Lagash, but most of them don't have imagery on them. So these may have been just basic seals where a jar had been wrapped with string, placed a cover over it, and then clay put on there to make sure that that stayed shut. But there are ones that have symbols, and those symbols indicate particular individuals or a particular group of individuals that had access to those things.
The meaning of the designs is something that is heavily debated in the academic world. Some of us think that the designs have less to do with the individual who is rolling the seal than it does with either the kind of commodity that's being protected or the place from which the commodities comes. We just really still don't have a convincing and singular formula for the meaning of the designs.
Now, this particular sealing was found in a trash context between surfaces, so it had gotten ground down with a lot of broken pottery and other things that had been used with the kiln that was firing ceramics. So we're wondering why that would be here. Perhaps it was simply dumped in from elsewhere, from an administrative context. But maybe they were opening jars of something here at the kilns themselves, and the ceilings were popping off. It looks like some of these ceilings are earlier than we think the kilns were, though, so that implies that they were dumped in from elsewhere to level off a surface. The imagery on these seals means a great deal. It must have meant something to the people that put it on there, and it's hard for us to backtrack and understand what it meant. In this one, there is clearly a person who's perhaps seated, and we think maybe this was a craftsperson or an administrator, because behind them are a number of commodities, and we can't necessarily identify them all. Some look a bit like loaves of bread, but they might be ingots of metal. But the other part of that seal is very difficult to understand. It could be some kind of an animal, but there's also this strange Hatchmark building, perhaps? We don't really know what it is.
Above it is this configuration, which has something that looks sort of vegetal. So this is a winding tendril, perhaps, with perhaps a leaf here. But then there also seems to be an upside-down horned animal head here.
Whatever the imagery meant, it signified control of commodities. And so we see a kind of rise of private ownership. in this early dynastic period.
But the designs are very important because they illustrate different aspects of life, and they are very important for us because they change over time and they change from region to region.
Whatever the imagery meant, there is an administrative control, and that is very important for the way that people lived at the time. I hope you enjoyed looking at this artifact with me, and I hope you'll join me again next time on Artifactually Speaking. I'm Brad Hafford.